Ja, guten Morgen, Herr Schmachtenberg.
So, good morning, Dr. Schmachtenberg. I would like to say it is a big pleasure and an honor to us that you give us your words of welcome. Dr. Schmachtenberg is one of the people who is well known when it comes to structure of integrating people. From 2014 to 2018, he was the Department for Participation of People with Disabilities, Social Aid in the Federal Ministry for Labor and Social Affairs. He was looking at working on the German Participation Act, the Equal Opportunities Act for the Disabled, and the National Action Plan to the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in the United Nations. Since 2018, he has been the Undersecretary of State in the Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. And I know that he's also active at the international level from 2011 till 2013. He was the director of the Indian-German Program for Social Security at the German Society for International Cooperation. And 6 times I have been in India with students in New Delhi, and we met Dr. Jain from the German Indian Program for Social Security. And it was about a health insurance program, in particular for the informal sector. And Mr. Jain explained to us that people say, what if I wasn't ill in that year? Don't I get money back? So the idea of an insurance, which is completely normal in our culture, is not self-evident in other cultural contexts. Dr. Schmachtenberg, I'm looking forward to your welcoming remarks. Professor Bicker, Professor Kohlhoff, members of the diBa project. And diBa is not a bank, that's your project actually. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to use this wonderful opportunity, and the closure of a 3-year project work is a good opportunity to be able to give you some words of welcome. It's rather lamentable that I can't be with you in person, but the hybrid format shows that digitalization can overcome borders and barriers and bring together people without them having to travel expensively, not only in the area of communication, but also and specifically in the world of work. And by the way, it actually saves energy consumption for traveling. But on the other hand, of course, IT also consumes some energy, which must not be overlooked. So before you present the results of your research work, please allow me to look at the big whole endeavor, namely to provide an inclusive labor market. The last 3 years of your research have not been the easiest ones, I'm sure. Corona pandemic, the horrible war in Ukraine. So we have the feeling that we are in a continuous crisis mode. Inclusion is and will be a central task. And by the way, it's core of our society model. Democracy requires inclusion. That's the motto of the Federal Officer for Concerns of People with Disabilities. And it is exactly this democracy that is being attacked by autocrats. If we moved away from our target to create an inclusive society, autocrats would have already won in one issue. So what we are working on here is also political. It is of immediate significance for being together, for living together, for many people in the country, and it's also got a lot to do with how we want to live with each other. And with each and every project, it gets very concrete, and the target in the context of your product is bringing people to work and for them to stay in work. It's about bringing more people with disabilities into the regular labor market, and at the same time to keep people with health impairments in their jobs. With the number of people with disabilities that are employed in the many years, as some might not believe it, we have made major progress. In 2020, more than 1.3 million heavily disabled people and people similarly disabled were in the common labor market, as many as never before since we started counting, and almost twice as many as in 2002, when we had the major changes with our equalizing levy that we started. So it shows that the system of obliged employment and a staggered equalizing levy is effective, but the effect could be even better because about 1/4 of the employers in Germany still does not have a single person with severe disabilities on board, although they would be obliged with it. Interestingly enough, the 25% seem to become a universal constant because in recent years the number of companies has increased and the rate stays the same. This is, of course, unacceptable, which is why last year, in an important first step of a two-tier approach with the strengthening of participation law, we decided improvements for employers, to ask employers to go the way of hiring people, providing apprenticeships for people with disabilities and informing them about it. So it should no longer be the case that companies apparently or supposedly have too few information about it. So those, as an employer, who have no single person with disabilities on board do not lack the information, but rather the wish to do so. And for those employers, in a second step, we'll now have a fourth stage with the equalizing levy and thus step up the incentives to hire a person with disabilities. We have zero tolerance for zero employment rate of people with disabilities. We, that is the Federal Ministry for Labour and Social Affairs, wants to start this legislative endeavour in autumn. And I'm convinced the combination from clear contacts with the fourth level of the law will make a major contribution to further open the labour market for people with disabilities. And it's right for the people employed and for the business world. Many people with severe disabilities are very well trained, and we know once they are on board in a company, very often they are seen as the most reliable employers that go through the thick and thin with companies. Inclusion in the labour market is not just some care or charity endeavour. It is a question of national economic reason. Ladies and gentlemen, sheltered workshops for disabled make a major contribution to the participation of people with disabilities in the labour market. I don't need to explain it to you here. Sheltered workshops are and will be an important part of the inclusive labour market because self-determination also means to deliberately decide for an activity in a protected, in a sheltered space compared to the activity in the business world. But the activity in the sheltered workshop should not be a one-way street. In an ideal case, it is a lane leading towards something else. People in the sheltered workshops need outlooks for the general labour market. You, dear Mr. Koloff, and your team from the Ostfalia University have taken a look at sheltered workshops for the last 3 years, closely cooperating with a cooperative of workshops for the disabled in North Germany. I'm always very pleased about these links between theory and hands-on work. Something good comes out of it. Practical work is reflected, and the theory is maybe coming a bit to the ground. That can be a good field of tension where actually some heat can arise. For 3 years, you have looked and come closer to the question as to how digital transformation has an effect, or what kind of effect it has on sheltered workshops and in the workshops, how people with disabilities participate in it, and what could be improved. Because digitalization, for me, means first and foremost access, provided you have the adequate technology. All of us have seen this during the pandemic. All of a sudden, hybrid events like this one today were no longer the exception, but rather the rule. And for many, they actually made access easier. Many all of a sudden had access to events where they never would have attended before. I'm thinking about expert meetings in Berlin. Since we have provided online screening, lots of people were able to attend, and more we came up with interactive formats. We wouldn't have started that without Corona. So you can actually also find a source of good in the evil situation. And And with this assumption, you started with your research. Each and everyone today typically has a smartphone. I know that in my family, with the older relatives, I know some self-assertive exceptions who say, I'm never going to buy that thing, but there you go. The people in the sheltered workshops are usually younger people, and I'm sure they are typically very likely to own one, so just assume they all own a smartphone. And thus, it is a fact that that they have access to the entire digital world, provided they know how to work with it. They have a tool in their hands that can allow them access, but does it really allow for the access? Together with people with disabilities, you found out what it requires to provide more participation by integrating people with disabilities throughout your entire research. I think this is excellent. It's a good example for active inclusion. Some call it design thinking nowadays. Great if you can call it that. Particularly, you involve the people involved in a rather intensive manner. You don't just ask them once, you actually bring them in intensively. That you've done. You didn't research about people with disabilities, but together with them. Thank you for that. And one result of your research is people with severe disabilities very often have the feeling that they don't know enough about the general labor market and they're not prepared adequately for the general labor market. Very often they're also concerned that their qualifications are not enough to work in companies. In the sheltered workshops, people with disabilities feel secure, they feel protected, which is why that is the place where they're not afraid to find out about new areas of work, and digital solutions can provide them with a timely support. Ladies and gentlemen, you designed your project before Corona, and you started with questions of digital transformation. You actually had the right idea within, and because of Corona, digitalization has become an even bigger and faster trendy issue. I said before, crisis should not become should not become a break or should not put a hold on inclusion. It needs to be its driver. It needs to be a tool that allows for participation, like in this event, but it also allows for participation in job. The ministry promotes participation in training, in apprenticeship, and in jobs. Transformation and participation need to go hand in hand. That way, we'll be able to transfer people from sheltered workshops to the general labor market. By financing model projects through the equalizing fund, projects like diBa can be supported. And now I'm very much looking forward to your meeting, to your results, to continue thinking further ahead. And with this, I close my greeting remarks and wish you a very successful event. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. Schmachtenberg. Your office has told me that you would be available for questions. So are there any questions to Dr. Schmachtenberg? Any questions? Hello, Dr. Schmachtenberg. My name is Uwe Hildner. I don't know whether you can see me. I suppose you can. The federal legislation on participation has given us new signs, which all in all I find good, and a major term was changed in the social aid legislation. We were always talking about groups of people of similar needs to help, and the federal law of participation thinks that it is significant to have independent people. Although when we look at the collective bargaining agreements for people here, we don't see many changes. We continue with the old system. In certain parts that is understandable and acceptable, but I would find it better if the individual feature, as is stated in the law, would be coming to the foreground. My question to you, Dr. Schmachtenberg, as ministry, do you see this, and what opportunities do you see to counteract this? Yes, we do see this. And how should I put it? One could actually get the confirmation from this that the new law is a change in paradigms from the general sponsoring to individual sponsoring and funding. And change of paradigm, I mean, getting this law was actually quite a difficult procedure, but on paper this can be done easier than in practice, and I do see people wanting to stay with the old system. This has many sources. Core is that, as a matter of fact, we can't see across the board that individual planning of individual participation would have started, and mainly it's lacking. There is a lack of agreements between those providing the services and others receiving the services. Only when that catalogue is up and running, you can start with individual participation planning. And just like Corona was speeding up digitalization, Corona here apparently is somewhat furthering or promoting those forces that want to stay with the old system. So I have tried in my explanations to explain this to you. What does the ministry do? First, observe the matter. Secondly, we have started evaluation procedures on financial matters, and we actually analyze the new Federal Participation Act. And as the states wished, we prolonged this for 2 years on certain issues, like on the effects of finances on income, and there we can actually make statements even today. In order to give some more time, we prolonged it for 2 years. At the federal level, we do not have immediate influence on the state level. It's unlike in India. In Germany, the 16 federal states form the federal level. Since you brought the Indian context, that's different. In India, the federal state can actually dissolve states and then move them back or cut them to pieces. And this has happened since 1949 various times. In Germany, fortunately, that's not the case. But it also means that the federal states have a certain level of autonomy, and they cannot be controlled by the federal level in no form or shape. We can only discover things, inform and accompany them and discuss matters, and also see to it that they demand this change of paradigm as well. Thank you so much. Are there any further questions to Dr. Schmachtenberg? My name is Gerd Picker. I'm Vice President for Research and Development and Transfer at the Ostfalia University. And in your presentation, you have said it and explained it quite clearly that for us as a university, it is very important not just to go the way of research, but that we actually also want to work on the implementing stage. As a vice chair, of course, I have a bit of an overview of this, and I am responsible for funding it, for the funding, and see where our funding agencies are. And we would like to say thank you for providing us with funding from your ministry. I do not have a detailed information, but I want to know, is there some idea or planning to have universities and to promote universities cooperating with each other and with society in the future? The Federal Ministry for Labor and Social Affairs is a ministry that controls and manages the social security systems and the tax-funded system, like basic funding for people in all of its facets, and it also provides the framework law for integration. We do not have a lot of funding that we can provide, and from my point of view, that's all good and well. It should be done in a combined way, and it should not be that people have interesting projects and need to go from door to door in Berlin up until such a time that one ministry steps in and says we do it. So The research ministry has the big research pillar. Economic ministry does funding for economics. Through the labor agency, federal labor agency, we promote labor, and through retirement funds, we do lots for retirement. Those are measures, individual measures that we are funding. And we actually sponsor model projects. Generally speaking, we just have the equalizing fund from which we financed this project, which is linked to three conditions. People with severe disability have to be brought into the labor market. It needs to have a model character, and it must not be something which is just limited to one state. Otherwise, one particular state could sponsor it. So those are the three rules for using the equalizing fund. And on top of that, or at the side, we have a big funding program where we offer the third tranche, and Ostfalia could come in here. It's called Reha Pro. It has as an addressee job centers and carriers of retirement funds, because those two we see as the actors in developing new forms of rehabilitation. And there we say that each and every project needs to be accompanied by a scientific evaluation, so that it's not just a standalone endeavor and somewhere in the backyard, and afterwards, when it's over, no one knows what happens. And in particular, in the context of rehabilitation programs, there are excellent twins between practice and theory. I was quite impressed. We just recently visited a project where very well-known scientists and universities were involved, and I had an impression, which of course always comes with a bit of a hope, a bit of a bias here. I had the impression that researchers apparently started to be interested in rehabilitation issues, so the money turned them into, or provided them with a bit of curiosity, which of course is a good opportunity for us to bring it to the wider scientific public. So to cut a long story short, generally no, but the exceptions prove the rule. And when we promote model projects, then we always like to do that together with observing science endeavors. Thank you so much for the added and very helpful explanation. That's very understandable. And partly your hope is right. I see it at our university as well, that in particular in this interface with digitalization, working with people, social work, maybe because of the funding, it's done, but it's also an issue where you can help, you can come in, and interesting projects come in. And the current project is an example that just goes to show it. And I'm looking to the dean here. I think we do have one or two or three other interesting projects that are up and running and that are developing specifically in this context. And I myself am a professor of informatics. I wouldn't have come up with that idea, but thank you very much for the explanations. Well, if I might add, when it comes to digitalization, a wave comes to us. A law that means the transition of a European directive, and this is about barrier-free devices and offers. And I'm sure development need will be coming in. We had a rather very an interesting workshop meeting with the telecom and bitcom people. For us as the Ministry for Social Affairs, this is something which is rather unknown to us, but we try to introduce this idea of no barriers throughout society.